let me create a blog.
Well, you've been talking
that
about American culture for the last half
There we
century.
go. There we go. And so I this is all about kind of spreading the passion
Right,
with that demographic of
right.
that. Okay. Okay.
Cool.
So thank you for having the time for us. For JazzinCode is the name of the blog in case you're interested. I'm just curious to know if you know, when you look at jazz and how jazz is progressing, and then you look at how technology is like defining how we live, how would you, as an artist, how would you generate a kind of passion for that particular audience, for people that develop apps and develop technology all day long?
Well, it's hard to spread the passion via applied technology because I still think there's no substitution for going to see it live. When you see live music, when you can actually feel the energy coming off stage, you can see the musicians playing the instruments and hear the sounds that come out of it, there's no substitution for that.
Mm-hmm.
So unless we can develop some sort of technique that gets people out of the house
Mm-hmm.
more,
Mm-hmm.
the challenge will always be there for musicians, particularly jazz musicians,
Mm-hmm.
to nurture new and younger audiences.
Mm-hmm.
We just got to get them out.
Yeah. Well, you personally, as your career has just continued to rise, I've noticed that, and which is wonderful. Have you noticed, as an artist, when you look out into the audience, have you noticed any changes in terms of who's coming to see your performances?
Um, it depends on where it is. I mean, I think in general, jazz has a much more mature audience base. Um, and that's only to be expected because the music is mature.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not saying that a 15 or 16-year-old couldn't enjoy it because they could, but it's just how it's presented in the grand scheme of things. I think it's harder than ever. Not just jazz musicians, but I think classical musicians have the same challenge. I think anyone who doesn't do pop music,
Yeah.
I mean, even rappers who are more positive and more cultured, shall we say, they're not household names either,
No.
you know. So I think an American pop culture is such a hard, static wall to break through, but it can be done, and it starts with people who appreciate the music. You telling me that wonderful story about your son. How old is your son?
He's now 16.
He's 16. You brought him
Yeah.
to my show,
Yeah.
so I mean that's how it begins.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And he's in a jazz band right now.
Nice.
Yes, he's now in the jazz band playing the drums. So.
Nice.
I wanted to ask you. So, no, that's a good point, and that's something that concerns me too. And I just think about what's popular and what people are listening to. Do you? And you mentioned Latifah. I heard you mentioning her, which is wonderful. And you're doing a lot of the collaboration with artists that were originally like pop. And do you have you ever had any interactions with any rappers per se?
Sure. Common has been a buddy of mine for a long time.
Right.
We haven't recorded together,
Okay.
but when I first met him, it was a shock because we met in New York.
Okay.
This was right before Like Water for Chocolate was released.
Oh, yeah.
And I was a fan of his already. I said, man, you're going to blow up.
Right,
Well,
right.
that was the understatement of the century.
Right.
But he said, you probably don't remember, but we actually met before. I used to come see you play in Chicago all the time. So I was like, what? I see Yasmin Bey all the time. We've
Okay.
never had a chance to officially collaborate. Queen Latifah, as you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and Black Thought and Questlove, all my
Right.
boys from back home.
That's right.
They don't count because we grew up together.
Right.
So, but sure, I
And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Well, I want to talk about because I saw you I live in Oakland, Bay Area, Berkeley, Bay Area, and I saw you last October at Yoshi's. And then I saw you, like I mentioned before, several years before that at Yoshi's. But your pianist, he is young. I mean, he's dynamic, and it's like he's an old soul. And so how did that collaboration come about?
Christian
Talented,
Sands,
talented.
you're mentioning.
Yeah.
I first met him when he was 18. I was sitting in for Marion McPartland as host for her radio show Piano Jazz. And historically that show was on the air for over 30 years, and she always had incredible artists on the show, people from Mary Lou Williams to Dr. Billy Taylor, to Hank Jones, to McCoy Tyner, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock. So I subbed, I think, for 4 shows, and I couldn't wait. I said, I'm going to get the interview and play with somebody cool. And she said, I got an 18-year-old kid from Connecticut. But at first I was like, really?
Right.
But then I was like, okay, well, if he's on your show, he must be good.
Right.
And she said he's a protege of Dr. Billy Taylor. And then my eyebrow went up and said, really? Okay. And he's also, he spent some time studying with Hank Jones. I went, wait a minute. Now I started getting, I was mad at myself. I was like, well, how come I don't know who he is? Right. Because I've been deeply involved in jazz education for a while, but then when I heard him, I said, whoa, he is an old soul. Thank God that he spent time around those grandmasters, because it makes a difference. Most jazz musicians are, it's funny because people get so impressed by Christian because of his age, but I think it's more because of his size.
He's a small stature guy.
But most jazz musicians usually start playing professionally when they're in their late teens or their early 20s. Miles was 19 when he played with Charlie Parker. Sonny Rollins was 17 when he made his first record. So I mean, nobody really enters the game as an old person, but Christian's different in the sense that, as you mentioned, he has an old soul. He's different from most of his peers. He carries himself with a certain sort of maturity and quiet confidence that you don't find in too many people in their mid-20s.
Ron, do you have any questions?
Talking about Christian, one of the things I noticed about him, he has a very light touch and not heavy-handed touch for a guy his age.
Oh, he can be heavy-handed, all right.
But he just looks twice,
well, he just knows when to turn it on and off. Yeah, I mean, because, when we're playing Who's Making Love, he ain't tiptoeing then.
Well, one of the things I always hear you talk a lot about is family. And so I know that's important to you. So who would you say is like your musical family outside of your band members that put it like this, if you had a chance to like set a table and you had to invite folks to the family, and you only could invite like 8.
Well, that's unfair.
I know.
That's unfair and impossible, and I won't answer that because there's too many. There's too many. I mean, you have an idea who I've worked with through my career. So I mean, it'd be way too many people to name who are in my musical family. I mean, because it wouldn't be just jazz musicians for starters. It would be a lot of people in R&B and in the classical world and in the pop world. So I would probably need an arena. Because just in my band alone over the last 5 years, I mean, I've had my big band, I've had this trio, I've had my quintet, Inside Straight, and then the band that I had for 8 years before that, the Christian McBride Band with Ron Blake and Jeff Keezer and Terrion Gully, and then the bands I had before that with Tim Warfield and Charles Craig and Rodney Green and people like that. So it's, I like to think that I have a pretty large musical family.
Well, I remember seeing you had the thing with James Brown.
Yes.
Now, how did that happen, and what was that like?
Well, actually, I don't know if I can give you a short answer, but I'll try. I'm actually working on a book that I'm hoping will be published by the end of the year or the beginning of next year. Actually, most likely as an audio book, telling my story about how I came to meet James Brown. Like everyone else on the planet who was around when he was performing, you couldn't help but be mesmerized by his energy and that sort of genius sense of performing, So I grew up a James Brown junkie. My uncle also, he kind of passed it on, because he followed James Brown in the 60s and 70s when he was really at his peak, So by the time I got to see James Brown live, I was a kid, in the early 80s, but he was still full of fire. You know, he was still screaming and dancing and splitting and doing everything. And my uncle was like, you know, thank goodness that you can still see him like this, because he's still dancing now just as fast as he was in the 60s. And then once the mid 80s kind of came around, he kind of took a steep drop off in terms of how he danced and how much he danced. So I'm glad I got to see him when he was still, you know, James Brown. You know, how did it happen? I was touring with Pat Metheny in 1993, and we opened for James Brown. And that was how I initially got to be in his circle. All his band members would stand on the side of the stage watching, and one of the guys in the band, his name is Mousy Thompson, great drummer. He had just joined James Brown's band, and he and I became really, really great friends. And you know, tap by tap, I just started getting closer and closer and deeper into the James Brown world. And then I got to meet Mr. Brown, and he knew about my jazz career. I played with him for the first time in 1997 at his birthday bash in Augusta, Georgia. And then when I became the creative chair for the LA Philharmonic's Jazz Series, my first season, I programmed Mr. Brown there doing a jazz concert. We did something called James Brown Sings Soul on Top, which was the name of an album that he did in the late 60s with Louis Belson's big band. It was like a jazz experiment. And so we did that album live.
Amazing.
Yep.
I did not know there was that kind of collaboration.
Yep.
That's great. And I guess the last question, can you tell us a little bit about the Philadelphia trip?
You know, I'm so excited. We haven't played together. Well, first of all, we did the album in like 2000. Yeah, we recorded the album 14 years ago. It came out in 2001, and we did 2 concerts in December, that December right after the CD came out. And we played again like 6 years later, which was 7 years ago, at the Bonnaroo Festival. We haven't played together since.
Amazing.
You know,
Amazing.
not because we haven't tried. I mean, we've tried many times through the years, but it's literally impossible to schedule what everyone's, you know, everybody's so
busy. Yeah.
And let me, you know, be real. It's mostly because Questlove is such an American pop icon. You know, I would guess that something like the Philadelphia Experiment would be like, you know, he's probably got all these different projects he's working on. The Philadelphia Experiment probably would be down here somewhere on his priority list. So the reason why we were able to make it work tonight is because the Roots are here also.
Yes.
So Tim Jackson, of course, you know, he's like, well, the Roots are going to be here. You're going to be here.
Philadelphia Experiment.
Let's put it back together.
Yeah.
So we're also going to record live, too.
Oh, awesome.
We can't miss this opportunity.
That's amazing. So, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, did you ever think, you know, that the fellas from Philly would do what they're doing?
Man, I'm so happy, man. It's you know, when you're 15, 16 years old and you're going to high school with these guys, I mean, they were all great then. Quest, well, you know, I never called him Questlove, but like I called him by his real name, Amir, and Joey DeFrancesco, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Boys II Men, they all were great in high school. So I think seeing them every day, you almost take it for granted. But then 25 years later, it's just like, yeah, they were just as great as I thought they were, you know. And I'm proud of everybody. Joey, Kurt, Boys II Men, and Amir is just,
a lot of talent.
He's just, you know, I'm very proud of Amir because he's one of the few guys that I know. He spent time really trying to study music, not just from a musical standpoint, but like he studies the social climate of all of the things that, like, he doesn't just study the music.
Right.
He's like a musicologist, you know what I mean? So he's very much into the overall picture. What was going on when this was made? How did it affect the industry? How did it not affect the industry? You know, like, we were the only geeks in high school. Like, we would say stuff like, hey, you know on that Jackson 5 record how the hi-hat is panned on the right side of the speakers? You know what I mean?
Yes.
You notice how this track sounds different from this one. That song must have been recorded in another studio by another engineer, and then we look at the back of the record and be
And you
like,
found out
okay,
that was
and
the
we
case.
would, we would know like who the engineers were, all the musicians, what studio was recorded in, what studio was mastered in,
So the analysis of
yeah,
what's
exactly.
behind the music, what makes the music
And
happen.
what happens is most people, I find that, maybe not most people, what happens, somebody has a talent, they get discovered, they do well in their career, they focus on their career, and that's it. But somebody like Amir and myself and Joey DeFrancesco, who did the same thing with jazz albums, we got deep down inside of the history of the music, So we weren't necessarily, nobody ever strived to be famous.
Right.
We strived to be good at what we did.
Right.
And once you do that, all that other stuff
Absolutely,
will come.
it just falls into
Yeah.
place. Yeah.
You can't work that hard and not be
Absolutely.
rewarded for it.
Yeah, that's a good message, for
Yeah.
anyone to listen to, those that are coming up
Yeah.
in their music.
Got to work hard. You got to go hustle. You got to get in there and get dirty and welcome the moments where you get embarrassed and you discover maybe you might not be as talented as someone says you are. You're only talented when you can keep recovering from mistakes that
Right,
you make.
right, right.
If you sing in a talent show, some song you've been singing at home in your bathroom and you win $100,000 on the talent show, okay, that's all well and good. But how well can you sing someone else's music? Like if I asked you to come and sing this song that you've never heard before, can you do it?
That's right.
So you
On the
got to
fly.
work hard at those things.
That's
Build up
right.
your musical skills.
That's right. Well, I think that's
I think you
15
can ask
minutes.
questions when
I
we
know
let
we
you
could.
go.
Is there anything else you can think of, Ron?
I've got plenty of questions, but the man's busy, so.
I know, and I did say 15 minutes, and it's 15
No,
minutes.
it's all good.
Oh, okay. Just one thing, and then I'll definitely let this be it. Have you always played the bass? Was there ever any other instrument that you picked up
Not
as
in
a
public.
youngster? Okay.
But yes, I play piano
Okay.
and drums.
Okay.
But again, like I said, unless I've had too much to drink, you'll never hear me play those instruments in public.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. I
I
hope
really,
to see
really
you guys,
appreciate it.
I'll be back.
I'm coming to the Philadelphia Experiment. That's what I'm.
Yes, you are coming.
much, sir.
Pleasure, man. Hey, man, are we playing Yoshi's Oakland or San Francisco in December? It's Oakland. Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Really
I'll see you
appreciate it.
Yoshi's in
Definitely will be
December.
there.
The one
Definitely
bass
will
solo
be
I always ask bass players about if they ever heard when they were growing up was the Willie Weeks bass solo.
Oh,
Johnny Hathaway,
yeah, of
Everything
course.
is Everything.
Of course. You know it.
He did when you came last year. You did all this R&B stuff. I mean, the serious R&B.
Well, that's
It was funky.
my thing. I tell people, we had to learn how to play jazz. We ain't have to learn how to play no R&B.
But that was such a delight. That was a treat.
I hope you enjoy the Philly Experiment.
Oh, I know I will.